Hi everybody, welcome to my talk today, Aims, Objectives and SMART Goals for Nurses, and I'll be providing some simple practical examples linked to nursing practice, research and education. Do check out my other videos, they're all free on my YouTube channel, Support and Career Development for Nurses, and if you find this talk helpful, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. When might you use these terms in nursing? So it might be that you have a research aim or objective, or a service improvement project aim and objective. So this talk isn't just for newly registered nurses or students. It also can be for experienced nurses that might be doing a master's dissertation or a service improvement or quality improvement project, who are a bit confused about what the difference is between an aim and objective. So it's going to be a simple overview. Also, teaching educational aims and objectives are slightly different. And you might have to do a lesson plan or a PowerPoint presentation or a poster presentation. And then you've got aims and objectives that might link to SMART goals or learning outcomes on your practice assessment documents, or you might have a Pebble Pad e-portfolio where you're uploading project work. You might have professional development plans or professional development reviews where you're writing goals and you're linking to competencies and learning outcomes as well. So what's the difference between an aim and objective? And I will also look at an overview of the SMART mnemonic, the acronym that's used to guide goals, objectives or learning outcomes. So the SMART mnemonic, you might write a SMART goal, but also you can review objectives to make sure that they're SMART, or review a learning outcome to make sure it's SMART as well. Oops. So what's the difference between an aim and objective? Usually there is one overall aim, and an aim is an overall statement of intent or a desired outcome. What do you actually want to achieve overall? I aim, for example, I'm going to aim to make a cake tonight at home. In comparison, objectives are what you need to do to complete the aim. For example, all the parts of the recipe. What do you need to do to make that cake if you're going to break it down into parts? And objectives are specific and measurable statements, and there are usually several objectives to complete an aim. So aims and objectives tend to use broader language and terminology. So for example, to explore or to examine or to improve something, to know or to understand about something, or to use something or to show something. Whereas objectives use more specific and measurable terms and active verbs. So collect, analyse, classify, measure, define or develop, select, synthesize, evaluate, produce, list, state, explain, discuss or describe as some examples. When you look at educational objectives, they're slightly different. So learning objectives often reflect Bloom's taxonomy, and I've got the reference at the bottom. So you may have new knowledge, which links to cognitive, developing feelings, emotions, affective, and then enhancing physical and manual skills, which is psychomotor, your skills. And learning objectives, educational objectives, are statements that describe what the learner will know or be able to do as a result of the programme or the learning activity. It could be a teaching session, a poster presentation, or a learning activity in practice, but it must be, the educational objective must be observable and measurable to know that you've met that objective and completed the objective. And you can see that competency-based education reflects knowledge, skills and attitudes, for example, or feelings, emotions, values. So some example language that you might want to use if you're looking at writing some objectives. If you're looking at cognitive knowledge type objective, to be able to demonstrate increased knowledge or understanding of whatever it is, or to be able to identify, and then there's other verbs you might use like define, state, classify, interpret, record, compare, or recognise. So hopefully some of this will help you if you're actually having to write some yourself. Looking at more psychomotor skills, so to be able to competently do whatever it is that you're doing, or to employ or use, measure, interact, observe, chart or record, assess, evaluate or modify. You are using psychomotor skills in relation to that objective. And then looking at more effective attitudes, feelings, emotions. So some example narrative might be to be able to demonstrate values that reflect a compassionate support, to be able to demonstrate values that reflect support and consideration for others. So using words like consider, characterize or value may help. So looking at learning outcomes, the learning outcomes are statements describing what the learner will know or be able to do as a result of a teaching session or a module or a program. So so the learning activity needs to be observable and measurable. And learning outcomes are often used interchangeably with learning objectives, and they're interconnected, but they're usually different, and it depends on the university and things get watered down and changed. But learning outcomes are usually measurable statements capable of being assessed, so they clearly state what a learner should learn, again using action verbs. So learning outcomes will state at the start what a student should know, value or be able to do at the start of completing a course or training or an experiential learning in practice, for examples. So some examples might be learners will be able to understand how to interpret an ECG trace, or to identify signs of deterioration in conscious level for individuals at risk of a neurological deterioration on a neurological ward. Learners will be able to correctly remove a wound drain, explaining to a patient what they are doing and why. So very specific learning outcomes and just very simple ones there. So looking at some example aims linked to research, practice, teaching, quality improvement project. So a research aim might be to examine newly registered nurses' perspectives of preceptorship support during their first year in one acute hospital trust. And then there may be a research question aligned to that, which might be what are newly registered nurses' perspectives of preceptorship support during their first year registered. But your objectives, if I sort of link some objectives to these aims, might be to initially review current literature to identify gaps in research to inform the study, or you might review literature to set the context for the study. Another objective might be to conduct 100 interviews, 100 nurses in an acute hospital trust to explore their perceptions. Or you could survey 10 nurses using student satisfaction questionnaires. Another objective might be to critically analyse, synthesise the survey or the interview data to inform a future preceptorship programme. So you can see from that aim, you could have different objectives depending on your study. An example linked to quality or service improvement, I've just put an example aim to improve student nurses' satisfaction during their first week on placement in one GP practice setting. Again, an objective might be to review previous student satisfaction surveys, so you're informing a baseline for your service improvement project. Another objective might be to review Deming Quality Improvement Model, the PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Deming's Wheel, to structure the implementation of your project. A third one might be you're looking at the actual improvement now. So your improvement might be to implement a new student welcome programme, or you could look at something like very specific, like assuring advanced rotas for all student nurses 2 weeks before arrival on the ward through different communication strategies. So you might have a welcome meeting where you assure the rota, or it could be on an email. And then another objective might be to survey 20 students using a student satisfaction questionnaire post-implementation, and then you might compare pre-post questionnaires to analyse the impact of that implementation. So hopefully that's given an example of an aim and some objectives. When looking at practice, so I've got down an example to competently communicate a nursing handover to other nursing team members by the end of my placement. So some objectives could be to review different types of nursing handover and strategies that can be used to improve nurse handovers. You might have a look at the literature as one of your objectives. You then might reflect with your practice supervisor on the most effective strategies and ways to provide a clear, concise and safe nursing handover. Another objective might be to practice handing over to other nurses one-to-one whilst under supervision of experienced nurses. You might want to reflect on peer feedback linked to your performance, what worked well, what needs to be developed. And then a later objective could be to hand over the shift hander to hand over to a group of nurses in a handover meeting by the end of replacement, and to evaluate and reflect on that handover. So you've got different objectives and it can be tweaked and changed according to your needs. Teaching objectives are slightly different. The teaching objective is a statement of what a learner will be able to do following a learning activity. So your activity, if I was going to do a PowerPoint to increase learners' knowledge and understanding of the anatomy and physiology of the brain. So at the end of that PowerPoint teaching session, the student will be able to state the 4 lobes of the brain and describe their function. The student will be able to identify the arteries of the circle of Willis and describe how they supply the lobes of the brain. They may be able to define, the student will be able to define the different types of nerves in the brain and their function, and explain the role of neurotransmitters and how electrical conduction takes place within the brain. It very much depends on me as the educator on what objectives I want the learners to be able to achieve. And it could be that I narrow it down and I just look at the lobes of the brain. It could be that it's applied physiology and I look at the management applied to certain conditions, brain tumours, for example. It depends on what you are trying to teach your learners. So hopefully that's given you an idea of different sort of types of aims, and really showing that you've got that one aim and then the objectives help you achieve that aim. Looking at SMART goals or learning objectives, because the SMART mnemonic can be used with learning objectives. SMART is an acronym that was first proposed by George Doran in 1981 to guide goals and objectives. A goal is what you're aiming to achieve, the desired result or outcome. To be competent at something, to complete my dissertation. My goal might be to be able to confidently speak to relatives. It's your learning goals are individualized to you. SMART goals, objectives or learning outcomes should be specific. So you need to be precise about what you're trying to achieve and what you're going to do. Clearly defining who, what, where, when. And if it's too broad, it's hard to measure. It should be measurable and quantifiable. So you need to know when you've met that goal. How are you going to measure your achievement or outcome when completed? So it really helps to use sort of concrete, specific language. I will be able to deliver a handover to a group of learners by the end of this placement. Achievable, so don't try to do too much or be over ambitious. Keep them simple so you can achieve them. The goal has to be based on your level of skills and your knowledge and your understanding and the resources you have. So it's got to be realistic, action orientated. So it should be agreed between you and your practice supervisor or your preceptor or your manager. It depends on what context you're writing your goal or your learning objective. Realistic means you've got to have the time and the capacity to achieve your goal, and it's got to be relevant and applicable. So don't make it too complex, and it will be time constrained. So always, you have to be realistic with the timelines that how realistic is it for me to achieve this goal? Is it better to have it by the end of placement rather than mid-placement? And do you want short-term goals for mid-placement and longer-term goals for later? So some stages to help you write learning goals or objectives. So first of all, you might want to identify what you want to learn or what you're going to do. So I want to learn about different nursing and support worker roles on the ward, or it could be allied health professional roles in a community setting. I want to be able to hand over a patient competently to another nurse on a mental health ward. Second stage, be specific, write it down in one simple sentence. Try not to use vague words like I want, as you can't measure that as an outcome. So I've just given some examples. To increase my knowledge and understanding of different nursing and support worker roles and responsibilities on the ward. So to increase my knowledge and understanding of allied health professional roles and responsibilities. It could be to increase my knowledge, understanding and skills to be able to competently hand over a patient to another nurse on a mental health ward. You could tweak the earlier ones that are focusing on knowledge and understanding to also include working with people with allied health professionals, but I've kept one more, knowledge and understanding. So third stage, use an action verb to describe what you want to achieve to make it measurable. So to increase my understanding of different nursing and support worker roles and responsibilities by identifying all nursing and support worker roles, determining how each role is responsible for patient care and service delivery on the ward. And then another might be to increase my knowledge and understanding and skills to be able to competently hand over to another nurse by observing, reflecting on handovers and practicing handovers under the supervision of my practice assessor on a mental health ward. So the first one there, you could also have working, as I said, you could be observing, you could be working with other allied health professionals, for example. So it just depends, they can be tweaked according to what you actually want to achieve. And then the fourth stage, linking your goal to a timeline. So the first one I've put, within 1 month post-registration, I will identify all nursing and support worker roles within Ward A and determine key responsibilities relating to each role and the impact these roles have on patient care and service delivery. So with that goal, you might have objectives such as liaising, collaborating, observing, going out and talking to allied to support workers or different registered nurses at different levels to achieve that SMART goal. But the SMART goal is this statement that's achievable and measurable. And then the second SMART goal, by the end of placement on a mental health ward, I will observe and reflect on nursing handovers, practice handovers under supervision to be able to competently hand over a patient to another nurse on a mental health ward. And then finally, add how you will show you have completed your goal. So how are you going to show that you've completed that goal? Usually you might have a practice assessor or a preceptor that may assess competence. It may be something linked to a patient outcome, or but once you've written, you can then check your goal to see if it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-based. So an example, final goal, within 1 month post-registration, my preceptor will assess that I have the required level of knowledge and understanding of all nursing and support worker roles within the ward area and the impact these roles have on patient care and service delivery. Or another one might be, by the end of placement 1, my practice supervisor will assess that I can competently hand over to another nurse on a mental health ward. By the end of placement 1, I will have the knowledge, understanding and skills to competently hand over to another nurse on a mental health ward. So you can tweak them and write them in different ways, but these are just simple examples and the different stages that might help you writing a SMART goal or a SMART learning objective in the future. If you're unsure about your aim, your objective, your learning outcomes or SMART goals, always ask for help and support. And university module leads, personal tutors, clinical educators and experienced staff often have examples and can help you with writing them. You can ask libraries or institutions for examples and review projects and dissertations for different aims and objectives as well, and look at university online resources. If you are interested in my other videos, I've got a video on how to choose your nursing dissertation topic and research question, and one on quality improvement, and also one on preparing for a nursing interview, and it also talks about aims and objectives in a bit more detail. And if you're interested in buying my books, there's some links in my description, in the video description. If you have any questions at all, put them in the YouTube questions, or if you prefer to DM me privately, you can DM me on Twitter, Instagram or my website. So I hope you found the session helpful.